They didn't hear the singing at the same time. That was the first mistake, because the forest only calls you when it already knows who you are.
Welcome to Horror Audiobook.
People think getting lost in the woods means losing your way. They're wrong. This is a story about a forest that doesn't want you dead, it wants you returned. A place that rearranges its paths, its trees, and your memories, using a voice that sounds like safety. A woman's voice, a childhood song, a lullaby you haven't heard since before you learned how to be afraid. By the time you realize the singing is not guiding you out, you will understand the truth too late. The forest remembers you, and it does not forget. Chapter 1. The song that only one of us heard. They had chosen the trail because it was supposed to be easy. That was the story anyway, the one printed on the weathered sign at the trailhead, the one repeated by the ranger with bored confidence. A loop through old-growth forest, clearly marked paths, no serious elevation changes, a hike meant to be finished before dusk. 5 people stepped past the sign and into the trees believing that story. The forest accepted them without comment. At first, everything felt ordinary in the way that only hindsight makes suspicious. The air was cool and damp, carrying the metallic scent of wet leaves and old bark. Sunlight filtered down in thin, broken columns, never quite reaching the ground all at once. Their boots pressed into soil that felt soft, almost sponge-like, as though it remembered every footstep it had ever swallowed. They talked loudly in the beginning, jokes, complaints about sore shoulders and cheap boots, plans for dinner afterward. Their voices bounced strangely between the trunks, echoing just a fraction too long, but no one remarked on it. No one except Mara. She was walking third in line when she heard it. At first she didn't stop. The sound was faint, so faint she wondered if it was only the wind threading through the branches, a gentle rise and fall, a pattern without words. It sounded familiar before it sounded wrong. Mara slowed, her boot hovering mid-step, listening harder than she meant to. The others kept moving unaware, their voices overlapping in careless rhythm. The sound drifted again, clearer this time. A woman's voice, soft and distant, humming a tune that brushed against the edges of memory. A lullaby. Her mother used to hum when the lights were off, but sleep wouldn't come. Mara could almost feel the weight of the blanket tucked under her chin, the quiet promise that nothing bad could reach her there. She shook her head sharply as if dislodging a thought. The forest didn't hum lullabies. That was ridiculous. "Mara," someone called ahead, "you good?" She caught up quickly, forcing a laugh, letting the sound of conversation drown out the echo still vibrating faintly in her ears. The trees closed around them as they walked, the path narrowing in subtle ways that were easy to ignore. The singing stopped. For a while nothing happened. Time in the forest felt thick, stretched. Minutes slid into one another without edges. The canopy above grew denser, dimming the light to a greenish twilight even though the sun should have been high. The trail markers, small white blazes painted on trunks, appeared less frequently, though no one could say exactly when that began. Jonah was the next to hear it. He didn't recognize the song at first. What caught his attention was the way the sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Not ahead, not behind, just present. He stopped walking. The group took 3 more steps before realizing he wasn't with them anymore. When they turned back, Jonah stood frozen, head tilted slightly, his brow furrowed in concentration. "You guys hear that?" he asked. They didn't. The forest was quiet in the way deep woods often are, not silent but full of small, distant sounds. Leaves shifting, something skittering unseen, the slow, patient breathing of a place that had been alive long before them. Jonah frowned. "I swear I thought," he trailed off embarrassed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Never mind." But even as he started walking again, his steps were slower. his gaze drifting sideways between the trees as though he expected someone to step out and greet him. The singing faded, leaving behind a hollow pressure, like ears adjusting after a loud noise. Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed something important. It sounded familiar before it sounded wrong. By the time Lena heard it, the forest had changed in ways that were harder to deny. The path curved sharply where no curve should have been. Fallen logs lay across the trail, forcing them to climb or detour, though none of them remembered stepping over them earlier. Their phones showed no signal, no GPS, just a blank, spinning icon that drained battery faster than it should have. Lena lagged behind while adjusting the strap of her pack. That was when the sound reached her, clearer than it had been for the others. A woman singing softly, close enough to hear breath between notes. Lena's chest tightened. The melody wasn't just familiar, it was precise. The exact tune her grandmother used to sing when braiding her hair, the same pauses, the same gentle stumble on the third note. "Okay," she whispered, heart pounding, "that's not funny." The forest offered no answer. She spun in a slow circle, scanning the trees. The trunks were thicker here, their bark ridged and dark, moss clinging in heavy curtains. Shadows pooled between them, unmoving. The singing drifted from deeper within, inviting without urgency, as though it had all the time in the world. When she ran to catch up, her breath came out too fast. She didn't mention what she'd heard. Somehow, saying it out loud felt like a mistake. Not everyone hears it at once, the forest seemed to say. Only when it knows you're ready. They stopped for water near a stream that hadn't been on the map. The water was black with depth, reflecting the trees like a mirror that refused to show the sky. No one drank much. That was when Caleb laughed. "Okay," he said, eyes wide but amused. "You guys can stop messing with me now." The others looked at him blankly. "The singing," he said. "I get it, creepy prank, very funny." No one laughed back. Caleb's smile faltered as realization crept in. "You don't hear it." The singing rose then, just a little, enough that Mara felt it prickle along her spine, enough that Jonah's stomach dropped, enough that Lena pressed her hands over her ears without thinking. It sounded familiar before it sounded wrong. The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried through the forest as if the trees themselves were humming along, vibrating with recognition. "Okay," someone said quietly, "we're turning around." They did. At least they tried to. The trail behind them did not look the way it should have. The bend was sharper, the trees closer together. The white blaze they expected to see on the nearest trunk was gone, replaced by bare bark, rough beneath Mara's fingertips when she touched it. The singing continued, patient and unbroken. And for the first time, all of them heard it at once. Chapter 2, we should have turned back at the trees. They all agreed later, though later would mean different things to different people, that this was the moment they should have turned back. Not when they first heard the singing. Not when the trail markers vanished. But when the trees began to repeat. At first it was subtle, the kind of thing the mind explains away without effort. A tall pine with a lightning scar down its trunk. A boulder split cleanly in two like a broken tooth. They passed them once, maybe twice, and thought nothing of it. Forests have patterns, that was common sense. But when the scarred pine appeared a third time, identical, right down to the blackened sap bleeding from its wound, Jonah stopped walking. "Didn't we already pass this?" he asked. No one answered immediately. Mara turned slowly, scanning the slope behind them. The ground rose at the same angle it had before. The same fern-choked ditch cut across the trail. Even their footprints looked familiar, pressed into mud that hadn't had time to dry. Lena checked her watch. "We've been walking straight," she said, more to convince herself than anyone else. "We haven't looped." Caleb crouched and dragged a finger through the dirt, then explained this. He pointed to a boot print half filled with water, Jonah's boot, same tread, same chipped heel. They were standing in their own past. The forest was still, but it was not empty. They tried logic next, real-world rules, the things you're taught in survival guides and weekend workshops. Jonah pulled out a compass. The needle spun once, twice, then settled north steady and sure. He exhaled in relief. See, we're fine, we're just turned around. They followed the bearing for 20 minutes. The scarred pine waited for them again. This time no one laughed. Mara touched the trunk, her palm pressed flat against the bark. It was cold, damp, rough in a way that scraped skin no matter how gently you rested your hand. Someone else, she told herself, had carved a small mark into it, a triangle, shallow but deliberate. I don't remember doing this, she said. Lena swallowed. Neither do I. They marked the tree again, deeper this time. Jonah used his knife, carving an X beside the triangle. The sound was sharp in the quiet, too loud. Wood shavings fell at their feet like pale teeth. They walked on. Minutes stretched, or maybe it was longer. Time had started to behave strangely, compressing, expanding, refusing to be measured. The sun hung above them at the same angle no matter how far they went. Light filtered through leaves in a frozen, greenish haze. When they returned to the tree, the X was already there. Fresh, clean, as if they had just carved it. No one spoke, they didn't need to. Panic didn't arrive all at once. It crept in the way cold does, numbness first, then a deep, aching certainty that something was wrong beneath the surface. Caleb tried humor. Okay, he said, forcing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. So we're lost. Big deal. Happens all the time. We just need to pick a direction and stick with it. Pick based on what? Mara asked quietly. He didn't answer. They followed the stream next. Water always led somewhere. That was another rule. The stream twisted between rocks slick with moss, its surface dark and reflective. Their reflections wavered strangely, faces stretching, blurring, as if the water couldn't quite decide what they looked like. They walked downstream until the sound of water faded. The stream was gone. Not dried up, not branching away, just ended. The rocks beyond it were bone dry, dusted with old leaves that hadn't been disturbed in years. Lena felt something unravel in her chest. That's not possible. The forest was still, but it was not empty. The singing returned then, faint, patient. Not ahead, not behind. All around. It wove through the trees, threading between trunks, brushing against their thoughts. The melody changed slightly each time it passed someone, slower for Jonah, softer for Lena, almost playful when it curled near Caleb's ear. Mara noticed something worse. It was getting closer. Not louder, closer. As if the distance between them and the source was shrinking, without the sound itself changing at all. They tried to climb a rise, hopping for elevation, for a view above the canopy. The slope was steeper than it looked, the soil loose beneath their boots. Every step forward slid half a step back. When they reached the top, their reward was more trees, endless, identical. The scarred pine stood among them. Jonah dropped his pack. No, 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 no. He turned in a slow circle, breathing hard, eyes wild. We're not moving, we can't be. This place, his voice broke, it's folding. The word hung there heavy. Folding. The forest wasn't a maze. It wasn't tricking them with paths and turns. It was closing. The realization settled over them like damp fog. Every direction was inward. Every attempt to leave only rearranged the space around them, guiding them back to where the forest wanted them to be. Still, contained, remembered. The forest was still, but it was not empty. Night did not fall the way it should have. Darkness seeped in from the edges instead, thickening the shadows between trees until they felt solid, almost touchable. Sounds changed. The small, comforting noises of wildlife vanished, replaced by a silence that pressed against their ears. And beneath it all, the singing continued. Closer now. Clear enough to hear words forming, almost words. Almost. Mara thought, suddenly and with terrifying certainty, of how lullabies were meant to be sung, not to guide someone somewhere new, but to keep them still. Somewhere deep in the forest, a branch snapped. And this time, it was followed by the unmistakable sound of bare feet stepping carefully through leaves, moving toward them, unhurried, certain they were exactly where they were supposed to be. Chapter 3. The voice knew our names. No one slept. They tried curling against tree trunks, backs pressed together, packs clutched tight, but rest never came. The forest did not allow it. The ground was too cold, too uneven, and the silence between songs felt heavier than the sound itself, like a held breath that never quite released. Hours passed, though above them the night stayed the same. The darkness was wrong, not deeper, not lighter, just fixed, as if time had paused the moment they stopped moving. That was when the singing changed. It wasn't louder. It didn't rush toward them. It simply became clearer, as though whatever had been holding back finally decided it no longer needed to. The melody softened, slowed. And then the voice spoke. Mara. She flinched so hard her shoulder struck Jonah's arm. Her heart slammed against her ribs, sudden and painful. No one else moved at first. Mara Bear, the voice corrected gently, with a fondness that made her stomach twist. You never liked the dark. That name hadn't been spoken aloud in over 20 years. Mara pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't traveling through the air the way it should have. It was closer than that, inside the small, fragile spaces memory kept sealed. I used to leave the hallway light on for you, the voice continued, soothing, maternal. Do you remember? She did, God help her, she did. The smell of warm dust and old carpet, the yellow glow beneath her bedroom door, the certainty that as long as the light was there, nothing could reach her. Jonah stood abruptly. Stop it, he shouted into the trees. You don't know her. The forest answered him immediately. Joey, the voice said, amused, you always hated that nickname. His breath caught. No one had called him that since his sister drowned, since the word became something sharp and dangerous, something people learned not to touch. The singing threaded through the trees again, wrapping itself around his name, repeating it with subtle variations. Joey, Jonah, Big Brother. Trust me. Lena felt it before her name was spoken. The pull, gentle and persuasive, like hands guiding her forward through a crowded room. Lenny, the voice said softly, you're still afraid of being alone. Her throat tightened. That was what her grandmother used to say when Lena cried at night. Not don't be afraid, just an acknowledgement, a promise that fear was shared. You don't have to be, the voice added. I'm right here. Caleb laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that cracked the stillness. Okay, nope, this is officially too much. But his bravado rang hollow, because his eyes were shining with unshed tears, and when the voice turned to him, it didn't mock. Cal, it said warmly, you always pretend you don't care. He stopped laughing. The forest was still, but it was not empty. The voice never guessed, never asked questions. It spoke only in certainties, in memories shaped by love and fear, and the quiet moments people never thought would be used against them. It didn't invent. It remembered. Mara noticed something else then, something that made her blood run cold. The voice was never wrong, but it was outdated. It used old fears, old comforts, pieces of them frozen in time. As if it knew them only as they had once been. You should come closer, the voice said, and for the first time it sounded closer to the ground. Lower, nearer. I can help you rest. The smell of the forest shifted. Damp earth, rotting leaves, and beneath it something faintly sweet, like old perfume clinging to fabric long forgotten. Jonah stepped forward, without realizing he was doing it. Lena grabbed his sleeve. Don't. He looked back at her confused. "She sounds tired," he said, "like she's been waiting." That was the worst part. The voice wasn't hungry, it wasn't angry. It was patient. They argued in whispers, clinging to logic that felt thinner by the minute. Lack of sleep, stress, shared hallucination, anything that fit inside the world they understood. The singing waited. Then the forest gave them a gift. Silence. The voice faded. The melody unraveled. The pressure lifted just enough for them to breathe again. Relief rushed in, warm and dizzying, and for a moment, just a moment, they believed it was over. Caleb let out a shaky breath. "See, it's gone, we're fine." That was when the footsteps began. Slow, careful circling. Bare feet against leaves, close enough to hear the soft compression of soil. Someone was moving just beyond the ring of trees, never stepping into sight. The voice returned, but it was no longer speaking to all of them. It was speaking to Jonah alone. "You never saved her," it whispered, "but you can save me." His face went slack, eyes unfocused. Myra shook him hard. "Jonah, look at me." He blinked, confused, then pulled away, embarrassed. "I'm fine, I just thought I heard." "You did," Lena said, "and that's the problem." The forest shifted again. Shadows leaned inward. The air felt closer, thicker, as if the space between trees was shrinking. The voice hummed approvingly. It had learned something important. Names opened doors, memories loosened locks, and trust, once formed, was the easiest thing in the world to walk through. As the singing rose once more, softer and more confident than before, the forest waited to see who would answer next. Chapter 4. Every path led deeper. Morning should have brought relief. Instead, it brought confusion. The light seeped in slowly, thin and colorless. As though the forest were reluctant to reveal anything all at once, dew clung to leaves and clothing alike, cold against skin. Their bodies ached in the dull, intimate way that came from sleeping badly on unforgiving ground. Muscles stiffened. Throats were dry. Stomachs already growled with a hunger that felt older than it should have. They took inventory in silence. One half-full water bottle, a crushed protein bar, a map that no longer matched the land beneath their feet. Jonah squinted up through the canopy. "Sun's rising in the east," he said automatically, clinging to routine. "If we head west, we'll hit the road by noon." No one challenged him. They needed direction the way drowning people needed air. They walked. The forest opened briefly, offering a corridor of younger trees spaced wide enough to let light spill down in pale sheets. For the first time in hours, the path felt like a path again. Their steps quickened. Caleb even smiled. "This is it," he said. "We're out." The ground sloped gently downward. Too gently. After 20 minutes, the corridor narrowed. Saplings thickened. Roots knotted together like fingers clasping the soil. The light dimmed again, retreating upward. Mara stopped when she realized she could no longer see the sky. "We were going downhill," she said. "Why does it feel like we're lower?" Lena checked her watch. It blinked 12:00. It had been blinking that since before dawn. Jonah looked back the way they'd come. The corridor was gone. Behind them stood dense, ancient trees, trunks thick enough that 3 people couldn't wrap their arms around them, bark dark and ridged, moss heavy, wet and untouched. No sign of younger growth, no sign of a slope. Just depth. They turned again, forward then, always forward. We were walking, but the forest was deciding. The singing returned as they moved, faint enough to doubt, persistent enough to feel followed. It threaded through the rhythm of their footsteps, slowing when they slowed, stopping when they stopped. Never rushing, never lagging. Hours passed, though outside, the day stayed the same. Hunger sharpened into something mean. Their movements grew clumsy. Every fallen log demanded effort. Every incline stole breath too quickly. Sweat cooled on skin and left them shivering even when they stopped. They tried marking their path again, strips torn from clothing, scratches in bark, a cairn of stones stacked carefully at a fork that should have led somewhere. When they looked back, the stones were gone. Not scattered. Gone. Caleb sank down onto a log with a groan. I can't do this forever. No one said he'd have to. Time distorted further. They argued about how long they'd been walking, 2 hours, maybe 4, maybe all day. The forest offered no clues. Shadows didn't lengthen. The light never warmed. Jonah stumbled, catching himself on a tree. He didn't let go right away. His forehead rested against the bark, breath coming hard. It feels like we're late, he said suddenly. For what? Lena asked. He shook his head. I don't know, just late. That was when Mara noticed their footsteps. They weren't fatting behind them the way they should have. The ground was too soft for that. But instead of stretching back in a line, the prints curved inward, subtly bending toward the trees, as if the earth itself had nudged them off course. As if it were correcting them. We were walking, but the forest was deciding. They reached another stream, narrower than the first, shallow enough to step across. Relief washed through them despite everything. Water meant direction. Water meant rules. They followed it. The stream curved. They curved with it. Then the water slowed, spread thin across a flat of dark soil, and vanished without sound. No pool, no seep, just absence. Caleb laughed weakly. Okay, that's new. The forest did not respond. They pressed on, deeper now. The air felt heavier, humid and stale, thick with the smell of rot and something faintly metallic. Mushrooms clustered at the bases of trees in pale, fleshy blooms. Some were crushed underfoot, releasing a sickly sweet odor that clung to their boots. Lena gagged. I think we're going the wrong way. Mara looked around, heart sinking. I don't think there is a right way. The singing swelled briefly, almost approving. As dusk should have fallen, the forest grew darker instead, shadows stacking upon shadows. The path they followed sloped again, steeper this time, dragging them downward into a hollow where the trees pressed closer together, their branches interlacing overhead. A bowl. A place that felt kept. Jonah stopped. We need to go back up. They tried. The slope resisted them. Soil slid underfoot. Roots snagged boots. Every step upward cost 3 in return. Exhaustion hollowed them out, turning fear into something dull and heavy. Caleb slipped and didn't get up right away. When they pulled him to his feet, his hands were shaking. We're not leaving, he said, not accusing, not angry, just stating a fact. The forest was quiet, listening. We were walking, but the forest was deciding. As they made camp again, if it could be called that, the singing drifted closer than it ever had before, not around them. Below. Somewhere beneath the roots, beneath the soil, something hummed like a memory that had finally found its place. And as the light dimmed to that same unmoving twilight, the forest settled, patient and certain, knowing that every path they chose from here on would only lead them further in. Chapter 5. The Woman Between the Trees. They saw her just after the light changed. Not dusk, something thinner. The color drained from the forest as if the day had been washed too many times. Greens dulled, browns went gray. Even the air seemed to pale, breath turning cool and metallic in their lungs. Mara noticed the smell first. Not rot this time, not damp leaves, something faintly clean, like soap left too long on skin. Do you see that? Lena whispered. No one answered because they all did. She stood between the trees. Not centered, not framed, just there occupying a narrow seam of space the forest hadn't bothered to close yet. Her dress was pale, once white perhaps, hanging loose and straight, brushing bare ankles that never quite touched the ground the way feet should. The fabric didn't move. No breeze stirred it, no breath lifted it. Her face was hidden by distance and shadow, too far to make out features, too close to pretend she wasn't real. Caleb blinked hard. That's just a trick of light. No one agreed. They waited for her to move, to step forward, to sway, to do anything that would make her fit inside the rules of the world. She didn't. The singing continued, but now it had a body to belong to. The voice drifted from her direction, soft and careful, a lullaby stretched thin with age. It sounded nearer than she looked, as if sound and distance no longer agreed on how far apart things were. Jonah took an involuntary step back. His heel struck a root, and he windmilled slightly before catching himself. The sound of his stumble echoed too loudly. Her head tilted. Just a fraction. Mara's breath caught. Did you see that? We never saw her walk, Lena said, the words slipping out without thought. They were certain of that. There had been no approach, no footstep, no gradual reveal. One moment the trees were empty, the next they were not. The forest held its breath. Hello, Caleb called, his voice cracking on the word. He cleared his throat and tried again, louder. We're lost. The singing faltered, not stopping but thinning as if stretched over a wider space. The woman's head lifted, slowly, deliberately. They still couldn't see her face. I think, Jonah said carefully, we should not talk to her. Mara nodded. Every instinct she had, old, animal, deeply buried, was screaming the same thing. Talking was an opening. Sound traveled both ways. The woman shifted. She was closer now. No one saw her move. The distance between them had simply lessened. The trees around her were different, thicker, older, bark darker, moss heavier. It was as though the forest had rearranged itself to bring her nearer without asking permission. We never saw her walk. Her feet were still bare, pale against the leaf-littered ground. They didn't sink. They didn't disturb the soil. The singing changed key, dropping lower, more intimate. The tune bent itself around the group, threading through their ribs, brushing against memories like fingertips testing doors. Mara felt tears sting her eyes without knowing why. The melody wasn't sad. It was comforting. Worse, it was familiar. She's not doing anything, Caleb said, though his hands were clenched tight at his sides. She's just standing there. The woman's arm lifted. Not fully, just enough for the sleeve of her dress to slide back, revealing a wrist too thin, skin stretched smooth and unmarked. Her fingers curled inward, beckoning not urgently, patiently. Behind her, the trees leaned closer together. Jonah shook his head. Don't, he said, please don't. The word please surprised him. The woman lowered her arm. Relief rushed in, sudden and dizzying. Mara laughed once, sharp and breathless. See, she heard you, she's just... The woman was closer again. Now they could see the outline of her shoulders, the slope of her neck, strands of dark hair hanging loose, obscuring what should have been a face. The singing didn't stop when she moved. It continued, unbroken, as if the sound wasn't coming from her mouth at all. We never saw her walk. Lena took a step back and bumped into Mara. She's not blinking, she whispered. They couldn't see her eyes, but somehow they knew. Caleb laughed again, the sound thin and brittle. Okay, very funny, we get it. You can stop now. The woman tilted her head the other way. The forest responded. Branches creaked overhead. Leaves shuddered without wind. The smell of clean soap grew stronger, layered now with something old and sour beneath it. The singing slipped into words. Not clear, not quite, just the shape of language pressing against sound. Jonah covered his ears. Make it stop. The woman lifted her foot. This time they were watching closely, every muscle tensed, every breath held. Her foot touched the ground. There was no sound. No shift in leaves, no compression of soil. She was closer still. Mara felt something inside her give way, not panic, not yet, but certainty. The kind that settles deep and heavy. She's not walking, she said. She's being remembered. The woman's head lifted fully. For a heartbeat, the forest seemed to lean away from her, as if giving space. They never saw her face, but they knew with terrible clarity that she was smiling. The singing swelled, wrapping around them, filling every hollow place hunger and fear had carved out. And as the woman stood there, impossibly near, impossibly still, the forest waited to see who would take the next step first. Chapter 6. The forest began to change us. They didn't speak about the woman after she vanished. Not because they agreed not to, but because language itself felt unreliable now, like a tool that no longer fit the shape of what was happening. Words slipped, meanings bent, even names began to feel optional. They walked again. Not together this time, not really. The forest had loosened something in them, and now they drifted in a loose, uneven line, sometimes side by side, sometimes separated by long stretches of silence and trees. No one checked behind as often. No one counted heads. It felt easier not to think. Mara noticed first when she realized she couldn't remember how long she'd known Lena. They'd met years ago, college, maybe work, but when Mara tried to picture the beginning, her mind slid off it like water on stone. The memory wasn't gone. It was smooth, featureless, as if someone had rubbed at it until only the idea remained. She glanced at Lena walking ahead, her pack hanging open. "Your zipper's broken," Mara said. Lena looked down, surprised. "Oh, yeah, I guess it is." Inside the pack, supplies were missing. Not lost, gone. The water bottle that had been half full was no longer there. Neither was the crushed protein bar they'd been rationing carefully. "When did you eat?" Mara asked. Lena frowned. "I didn't." They stared at the empty space, both waiting for the panic that should have come. "It didn't." "Well," Lena said after a moment, shrugging the pack back into place, "it's fine." It felt easier not to think. Caleb was humming. The realization came to Jonah slowly, like waking from a dream you didn't remember entering. The tune drifted back to him from a few yards ahead, soft, off-key, familiar. Too familiar. "Caleb," Jonah said, "what are you humming?" Caleb stopped walking. For a moment he looked confused, as if the sound hadn't been coming from him at all. "This?" he asked and hummed again. It was the lullaby. The forest was still, but it was not empty. "Don't do that," Jonah said, sharper than he meant to. "Don't hum it." Caleb laughed, a genuine laugh this time, light, almost relieved. "Why not? It's catchy." Jonah reached out and grabbed his arm. The contact felt wrong, too thin beneath the skin, like there wasn't enough of him there. "Stop," Jonah said, "please." Caleb pulled away, annoyance flashing briefly across his face. "You're acting weird." The words stung more than they should have. They walked on. Hours passed, though outside the forest did not change. They stopped trying to track time altogether when Mara realized her watch was gone. Not broken, not stopped. Gone. She couldn't remember taking it off. They stopped arguing too. Disagreements required effort, memory, intention, cause, and effect. All of that felt heavy now, like lifting something waterlogged. It felt easier not to think. Jonah dropped his pack without comment at some point. It landed softly, as though the ground had been waiting for it. He took 2 more steps before Lena noticed. "You forgot your bag," she said. He looked back at it, puzzled. "Did I?" "That's all our stuff." Jonah considered this, then shook his head. "It's slowing us down." Before anyone could stop him, he turned away and kept walking. No one chased after him. The forest accepted the offering. Mara felt a flicker of something, fear, maybe guilt, but it slid away before it could take shape. The trees ahead seemed clearer, the path smoother. Reward without explanation. The singing threaded through it all, quieter now, less insistent. It didn't need to push. The forest had learned something new. That resistance faded faster when people were tired. That memory softened under repetition. That care could be worn down. Lena stopped using full sentences. She spoke in fragments instead, observations, feelings. Tired, cold, feels nice here. She stood very still at one point, palm pressed flat against a tree, eyes closed. The bark left faint impressions on her skin when she pulled away, patterns that didn't fade. Mara watched her, unease stirring at last. "What are you doing?" Lena smiled faintly, listening. "To what?" Lena hesitated, as if the question itself were strange. "I don't know, but it knows me." The phrase sent a shiver through Mara that cut through the fog. Caleb wandered off briefly, only a few steps, only a moment. But when Jonah called his name, the sound came out wrong, slurred, unfamiliar. Caleb returned smiling, cheeks flushed, eyes bright. "I found something," he said. "What?" Mara asked. He shrugged. "I don't remember." They didn't ask him to explain. It felt easier not to think. As darkness crept in, again without warning, without transition, the forest closed tighter around them. Trees leaned. Roots rose. The space between trunks narrowed just enough to force them closer together. The singing swelled slightly, approving. Mara fought against the heaviness then, sudden and desperate. She tried to remember her last name, her address, the sound of her own voice when she was alone. The answers came slowly, muffled, like voices through water. Around her the others were quiet, calm. Too calm. Caleb sat down at the base of a tree and didn't get up. Lena curled beside him, eyes half-lidded, breathing slow and even. Jonah stood nearby, head tilted, listening to something Mara couldn't hear. "Don't," she whispered. She wasn't sure to whom. The forest did not respond. The singing softened into a hum, wrapping around them like a blanket pulled too tight. And as Mara struggled to hold onto the shape of herself, the forest waited patiently, knowing that soon, thinking would stop altogether and nothing would resist it anymore. Chapter 7. One of us answered the song. The sound changed when Caleb spoke. It wasn't immediate. The forest didn't react the way something startled might. There was no crash of branches or sudden wind, no sharp spike of fear. Just a pause. The singing thinned, stretched, as if listening back. They had been sitting in a loose circle, exhaustion pinning them in place. The ground beneath them was soft and dark, smelling of damp earth and crushed leaves. The trees leaned inward, their trunks forming a natural boundary that felt intentional, almost careful. Caleb sat with his knees drawn up, chin resting on them, humming softly. Mara watched him, dread pooling slow and cold in her stomach. "Caleb," she said quietly, "please stop." He didn't look at her. His eyes were unfocused, fixed somewhere beyond the trees. The humming slipped back into singing, low, gentle, almost shy. Then he answered it. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a soft, almost embarrassed reply, as if responding to someone calling his name from another room. "Yeah," Caleb said, "I hear you." The forest inhaled. The singing stopped. For a heartbeat, the silence felt like relief, real relief, the kind that loosens muscles you didn't realize were clenched. Lena smiled faintly. Jonah let out a breath he'd been holding for hours. Mara stood up. "Caleb," she said, sharper now, "what did you just say?" Caleb blinked, finally looking at them. He frowned, confused. "What?" "You talked back," Jonah said. "You answered it." Caleb laughed softly. "No, I didn't. I was just—" he hesitated. "I thought someone asked me something." The forest shifted. Not visibly, not audibly. But the space behind Caleb felt deeper. Mara took a step toward him. He was gone. There was no scream, no struggle, no blur of movement. One moment Caleb sat there, solid and breathing and human. The next, the space he occupied was empty. Leaves settled where his weight had been, drifting down slowly, as if released from a hand. Lena stared. Caleb. No answer. Jonah spun, scanning the trees wildly. Caleb, this isn't funny. The forest did not respond. Mara dropped to her knees, hands pressed into the soil where he had been. It was still warm. Not heat pressure, maybe. The ground remembered him. He didn't walk away, she whispered. He didn't stand up. The singing resumed. Closer now, clearer. Satisfied. Lena's breathing quickened. Where did he go? Mara didn't answer because she understood. Caleb hadn't been taken. He had been accepted. The forest listens when you listen back. Jonah backed away slowly, shaking his head. No, 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 he didn't go anywhere. The singing bent around his words, playful now, almost indulgent. Mara stood, heart pounding. We can't respond, do you understand? We can't acknowledge it, not with words, not with sound. Lena swallowed hard. What about thinking? The question lingered. The forest did not need an answer to that yet. They moved again, faster this time, fear cutting through the fog that had dulled them for so long. Every snapped twig made them flinch. Every shift of shadow felt intentional. The singing followed, never gaining, never falling behind. Hours passed, though outside, the forest remained unchanged. They didn't call Caleb's name again. It felt dangerous now, like shouting into a mouth that was already chewing. As they walked, Mara noticed something else. The forest had closed ranks where Caleb vanished. The trees there were thicker, bark smoother, roots woven tightly together. Azim stitched shut. He's still here, Lena said suddenly. Mara looked at her. What? Lena gestured vaguely to the ground. I can feel him, like a vibration, like when you know someone's behind you. The singing softened, approving. Jonah pressed his hands over his ears. It wants us to talk, that's the trick. Yes, Mara said, it wants permission. They stopped when the path narrowed into a corridor of trees, so tight they had to turn sideways to pass. The bark brushed their clothes, their skin, leaving streaks of damp green behind. At the center of the corridor, the singing stopped again. Mara's mouth went dry. The silence this time was different, expectant. Lena's lips parted. Mara grabbed her arm hard. Don't. Lena blinked, startled, as if waking from a dream. I was just going to. I know, Mara said, her voice shook. That's why you can't. The forest seemed to lean closer, disappointed but patient. They pushed through the corridor and stumbled into a small clearing. The ground dipped gently inward, forming a shallow bowl. The air here smelled cleaner, fresher, like soap and rain. A place made for resting. Mara understood then. This was where Caleb had gone. Not down, not away. In. The singing resumed, softer than ever, barely more than a breath. No words now. Just waiting. Mara looked at Jonah and Lena, really looked at them. At the hollowed eyes, the trembling hands, the way the forest had already begun to smooth their edges. The forest listens when you listen back, she said aloud, deliberately, forcing the words into the air like a charm. So don't. The singing paused. And in that brief, fragile silence, the forest seemed to consider its next move, knowing it had time, and knowing that eventually someone would answer again. Chapter 8. We found evidence we had been here before. They found the campsite by accident. Or maybe the forest decided it was time. The ground sloped gently downward, the trees thinning just enough to let a gray wash of light spill through. Mara noticed the smell first, cold ash, old smoke, and something sour beneath it, like fabric left damp for too long. She stopped walking. Jonah nearly collided with her back. What is it? Mara pointed. A fire pit sat at the center of the clearing, stones arranged in a careful ring. Blackened wood collapsed inward, long burned down. The earth around it was compacted, pressed flat by bodies that had sat there for hours. Days. Someone had been careful here. This is recent, Lena said. She knelt, brushing fingers across the ash. It came away dry, powdery, ancient. This could be years old. Jonah shook his head. No one camps this deep. There's no trail. Mara's stomach tightened. We did. They searched the clearing in silence. A length of frayed rope tangled in roots, a rusted carabiner half buried in dirt, food wrappers bleached pale, labels long faded. All wrong, all familiar in a way that made Mara's skin prickle. Then Lena froze. She reached beneath a fallen log and pulled something free. A shoe. Mud-caked, cracked at the sole, one lace missing. Mara knew it instantly. That's mine, she whispered. Jonah looked at her sharply. That's not possible. Mara turned it over with shaking hands. On the inside heel, barely visible beneath grime, were the initials she'd written years ago before a long trip. M.R. I wore these, she said. I wore them here. Lena backed away slowly. We've never been here. Mara's voice came out thin. Yes, we have. The forest was still, but it was not empty. They found more as they searched. Scratches carved into tree bark, old ones layered over older ones. Symbols repeated, triangles, excess, circles broken by lines, attempts at marking something, or warning. Nothing here was new. Jonah found a pack lodged between two roots, its fabric rotted and splitting. Inside were brittle maps, edges curled inward. One of them showed a trail that did not exist anymore, marked in pen with frantic arrows and notes. Wrong way. Don't follow. Remember this. Remember what? Jonah murmured. The forest offered no answer. Time folded in on itself as they moved through the clearing, uncovering fragments of lives left behind. A notebook with pages fused together by moisture. A knife snapped clean in half. A watch face cracked, hands frozen at 12:00. Lena stared at it. Mine stopped like that too. Mara felt dizzy. Maybe we got out once. The idea hovered between them, fragile and dangerous. Maybe we're just finding someone else's stuff, Jonah said quickly. Someone who didn't make it. But his voice lacked conviction. They found the last piece, near the far edge of the clearing. A tree marked deeper than the rest. Carved into its trunk were words, gouged with desperate force. Do not follow the singing. Mara's breath caught. Below it smaller, almost careful. You won't whole. Nothing here was new. The realization settled slowly, heavy as wet cloth. This wasn't the first time people had been here. It wasn't even the first time they had been here. The forest didn't trap strangers. It recycled them. Lena sank to the ground, arms wrapped around herself. How many times? She whispered. No one answered. The singing drifted faintly at the edge of the clearing, content to wait. It didn't need to hurry. It had all the time they'd ever lose. Jonah paced, running hands through his hair. If we've done this before, if we escaped, then we can do it again. Mara looked at the carved warning, at the shoe in her hands, at the campsite built by people who had known exactly what they were doing. Can we? She asked. The forest shifted, subtle and slow. The light dimmed just enough to remind them that staying here was not an option. They left the clearing behind, though it felt wrong to turn their backs on proof, on truth carved into bark and bone. As they walked, Mara noticed something carved low on another tree, smaller, easier to miss. A tally. Lines cut into the wood, dozens of them. She didn't tell the others. Nothing here was new. And somewhere deep in the forest, the singing continued, older than memory, older than fear, patiently waiting for the next loop to close. Chapter 9. The forest does not let you leave whole. They decided to run. Not all at once, not with words. The decision arrived the way rot did, quietly, inevitably, until suddenly it was everywhere. Mara felt it settle behind her eyes, sharp and burning. Jonah's hands shook with it. Lena stood very still, jaw clenched, as if afraid motion would crack her resolve. The forest noticed. The air thickened. Sounds dampened, then sharpened, as if tuned deliberately. The singing retreated just enough to make space for other noises, the scrape of branches, the slow creak of trunks leaning closer together. "We go now," Mara said, straight, no stopping. Jonah nodded. Lena didn't answer, but she stepped forward when Mara did. They ran. Roots rose to meet their feet. Soil gave way without warning. The forest shed its patience. Branches whipped their faces. Thorns caught clothing and skin, tearing fabric, drawing thin, burning lines of blood. Every breath tasted green and bitter, the smell of crushed leaves and sap filling their mouths. They burst into a narrow ravine, stone walls slick with moss, damp and cold. The space funneled them forward, the ground sloping down too steeply. "This way," Jonah shouted. Mara followed, then Lena, until Lena fell. The sound was small, a dull thud, a sharp, wet breath. Mara skidded to a stop and turned back. Lena lay twisted at the base of the slope, one leg bent wrong, face pale and shocked. "I'm okay," Lena said too quickly. "I can." She tried to stand. Her scream cut off halfway, swallowed by the ravine. The forest was still, but it was not empty. Jonah dropped beside her, hands hovering uselessly. "Don't move, don't." The singing surged, louder now, closer, threading through the ravine like a tide pushing inward. Lena clutched Jonah's sleeve. "It hurts," she whispered, then quieter, "I hear it." Mara's chest tightened. "Don't answer," she said, "whatever you do." Lena nodded, tears streaking her face. "I won't." They tried to lift her. She cried out again, breath ragged, and the sound seemed to please the forest. The walls leaned closer. Pebbles trickled down, tapping softly against bone. "We can't carry her," Jonah said, voice breaking. "Not like this." Mara knew it before he finished the sentence. The truth had been waiting. The forest always keeps something. "I'll stay," Lena said suddenly. Both of them froze. "No," Mara said. "No, you won't." Lena smiled weakly. "It's okay. I think it already knows me." The singing softened, intimate. Jonah shook his head. "We'll find another way." "There isn't one," Lena said. She looked past them, eyes unfocused, listening to something they couldn't hear. "I remember this part." Mara's throat closed. "Remember what?" Lena swallowed, letting go. The ravine shuddered. A crack split the stone wall behind them, deep and slow, like the earth exhaling. "We have to go," Mara said, forcing the words through the pressure in her chest. "Now." Jonah stared at Lena, helpless. She reached up, touched his cheek with trembling fingers. "Don't say my name," she whispered. "If you say it, I won't be able to stop listening." The singing swelled. Mara grabbed Jonah's arm and pulled. Hard. He stumbled back, resisting, then gave in as the ground trembled beneath them. "I'm sorry," he choked. Lena closed her eyes. They ran. Behind them the ravine narrowed. Stones slid. Roots snapped like bones. The singing rose, not triumphant, not cruel, simply complete. When they didn't hear Lena scream, that was worse. They burst out of the ravine into a stand of young trees, thin and pale, their trunks too close together to pass through easily. The forest pressed in from all sides now, overtly hostile, shedding subtlety like a skin it no longer needed. Mara's foot caught on a root. She fell hard, the impact knocking the air from her lungs. Jonah hauled her up without stopping. Blood soaked her sleeve where bark had torn into her arm. She didn't feel it. Pain had become distant, negotiable. They reached a ridge. For a heartbeat the trees thinned. Wind brushed their faces, real wind, cold and clean. Beyond the ridge the land dropped away. Far below a line cut through the green. "A road." Jonah laughed, a broken sound. "We made it." The forest roared. Branches lashed, the ground heaved, the ridge narrowed, crumbling underfoot. Myra stumbled again. This time Jonah fell with her. He rolled, struck a rock, and cried out, clutching his side. "Go," he gasped. "I can't." Mara grabbed his jacket. "Get up." The singing cut through everything, sharp and urgent, no longer patient. The forest surged, closing the distance. Jonah met her eyes and understood. "The forest always keeps something," he said, calm settling over him like a decision. "Make it be me." Myra shook her head, tears blurring the world. "No." He pressed something into her hand, a small, cracked watch face, frozen at 12:00. "Remember," he said. Then he turned toward the trees. Mara screamed his name. The forest listened. She ran. The ground fell away beneath her feet, and she slid, tumbled, clawed at earth and roots until her hands bled. She didn't stop until the trees ended and the world opened up, road, sky, distance. She collapsed at the edge of the asphalt, gasping, shaking, whole enough to stand but missing pieces she could already feel tearing away. Behind her, the forest fell silent. Somewhere within it, the singing resumed, soft, satisfied. The forest always keeps something. And as Mara lay there, clutching the watch face, she understood with terrible clarity that escape was not an ending. It was a remainder. Chapter 10. Do not follow the singing. Mara woke to the sound of engines. Not immediately. At first it blended with the forest in her mind, a low, distant hum that could have been wind moving through branches. It took time for the difference to register, for the smell of asphalt and oil to replace rot and damp earth, for the hard, flat certainty beneath her body to announce itself as road, not soil. She was out. The thought felt fragile, like a word spoken too loudly in a quiet room. A truck idled nearby, hazard lights blinking. A man stood a few yards away, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in a calm voice that felt impossibly far removed from what she had just survived. He glanced at her now and then, concern written plainly on his face. "Yeah," he said into the phone. "She's conscious, looks hurt, but she's breathing." Mara tried to sit up. Pain flared, sharp and bright, reminding her that she still had a body and that it had been used roughly. The man hurried over, crouching beside her, telling her not to move, that help was coming. She nodded, though she wasn't listening. She was listening for something else. At first there was nothing. No humming beneath the world. No distant lullaby. Just wind moving across open space and the sound of tires passing on the road below the ridge. Relief came in a wave, so sudden it made her dizzy. It was over. Hours passed, though outside. The day finally moved the way days were supposed to. They took her to a hospital, asked questions, took notes. Words like exposure, dehydration, shock floated through the room. She answered what she could, leaving gaps where names should have been. When they asked about the others, she said she'd been hiking with friends. She didn't say how many. She didn't say where they went. At night she slept. That was the first warning sign. Sleep came too easily, pulling her under without the resistance she'd expected. Dreams wrapped around her gently, familiar and warm. She dreamed of soft light beneath a bedroom door, of a voice humming nearby, close enough to feel safe. She woke with tears on her face and the taste of soap in her mouth. The doctors said recovery would take time. Cuts healed, bruises faded, her arm scarred where bark had torn into it, the pattern oddly reminiscent of moss. She went home. The city felt loud after the forest. Too many sounds layered at once, all demanding attention. She filled her apartment with noise, music, television, the constant chatter of something that wasn't quiet enough to listen back. For a while it worked. Then one night, as she brushed her teeth, the power flickered. Just once. The lights dimmed, then steadied. In the brief pause between, she heard it. So faint she almost missed it. Ahem. Mara froze, toothbrush slipping from her fingers to clatter against the sink. Her heart hammered, every muscle locked in place. Silence followed. She laughed shakily at her reflection. "You're fine," she whispered. "You're just tired." But as she crawled into bed, pulling the blanket up beneath her chin, she noticed something that made her breath catch. The hallway light was on. She was certain she hadn't left it that way. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Life resumed its shape around her, but it never quite fit the way it had before. She startled at soft sounds, avoided parks, couldn't bring herself to walk beneath trees taller than buildings. And sometimes, only sometimes, when the world grew quiet enough, she heard the singing. Never loud, never urgent, just present. In the grocery store, between aisles, threading through the hum of refrigerators. In the distance while waiting for a train. Once, terrifyingly close, while she stood alone in an elevator stalled between floors. Each time, it sounded familiar before it sounded wrong. She learned not to respond. Not with words, not with humming, not even with thoughts shaped too clearly. She learned to keep moving, to fill the silence, to pretend not to notice when the melody followed her from room to room. But the forest was patient. It did not need trees anymore. One evening, months later, Mara found something tucked into the back of her closet. A shoe. Mud-caked, cracked at the sole, one lace missing. Her initials were still there, faint but visible. She didn't remember bringing it home. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, a message from an unknown number. No text, just a voicemail notification. Mara stared at it for a long time before pressing play. At first, there was only static. Then, softer than breath, a familiar tune began to play. The voice was gentle, knowing. Waiting. Mara ended the call without listening to the end. She sat on the edge of her bed, shaking, hands pressed to her ears, repeating the warning carved into bark she could still see when she closed her eyes. Do not follow the singing. The lullaby continued, drifting from somewhere beyond the walls, beyond the city, beyond places with names. The forest had let her go, but it had not let her leave. Because it remembers. Because it listens. Because no matter how far she ran, no matter how much of herself she left behind, it knows where you are.
Closing chapter.
The forest was never a place. It was a memory that refused to let go. It learned what you loved. It learned what made you feel safe. And it used those things to lead you somewhere you could never fully leave. Because the most dangerous traps don't look like threats, they sound like comfort. They sound like home. They sound like something calling your name in the dark, promising that everything will be okay if you just take one more step forward. So remember this when the world goes quiet. When something familiar calls out to you. When instinct tells you to follow instead of think. Do not follow the singing. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you pause or look over your shoulder, then you already know what to do. Subscribe, stay listening. And whatever you do tonight, don't answer the voice.